The cargo crate shifted again, and Daniel Reed froze mid-step. He'd been hauling freight for 6 years, and boxes didn't move on their own. His small ship, the Wandering Star, sat docked at Gateway Crossing while he loaded the last supplies for his run to the outer colonies. The station hummed with its usual chaos of traders, travelers, and deal-makers from 100 different worlds. Daniel set down the power loader controls and approached the stack of sealed containers. Another scrape, then a tiny whimper. His heart rate kicked up. That sound definitely came from something alive. "Hello," he called softly, moving around the crates. "Anyone there?" Silence answered him. Daniel had spent 5 years rehabilitating injured animals back on Earth before the debt from his mother's medical bills pushed him into space work. He knew the sound of a scared creature when he heard one. He found the source behind a cluster of supply boxes marked for the agricultural colony. 3 pairs of eyes gleamed in the shadows, reflecting his handheld light. Not human eyes. These glowed with an amber intensity that made his breath catch. "Easy now," Daniel murmured, crouching down slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The eyes blinked. One set disappeared, then reappeared closer. Daniel's light caught scales mixed with soft fur, a small face with features that reminded him of the big cats from Earth, but clearly alien. The creature couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. Then he saw 2 more behind it, smaller and trembling. They were children, injured children. The largest one had a gash along its shoulder, dried blood matting the golden fur. The middle one favored its left leg, and the smallest pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "It's okay," Daniel said, keeping his voice gentle. He'd used the same tone with frightened wolves and traumatized bears. Fear was universal. "You're safe here." He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a ration bar. Not ideal food for alien kids, but it was something. He broke off a piece and held it out, not moving closer. The largest cub sniffed the air. Its ears, pointed and mobile, swiveled toward him. After a long moment, it crept forward and snatched the food, retreating quickly. The other 2 watched as their sibling ate. When nothing bad happened, they edged closer too. Daniel broke the bar into smaller pieces, letting them come to him. Their fear was palpable, but hunger won out. As they ate, he got a better look at them. Scales ran along their spines and outer arms, while soft fur covered their faces and bellies. Retractable claws clicked against the deck plating when they moved. They wore torn clothing that had once been fine quality. "Where did you 3 come from?" Daniel wondered aloud. The station's announcement system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Gateway Crossing is now under full lockdown. No ships may depart. All citizens must remain in their current locations. This is not a drill." Daniel's stomach dropped. Lockdowns meant serious trouble. "Security teams to all docking bays. Begin immediate search protocols. Repeat, all teams begin search protocols." The cubs whimpered and pressed closer together. The smallest one started making a keening sound that broke Daniel's heart. His communicator buzzed. News feeds flooded in from every channel. Daniel's eyes widened as he read the alerts. The Dravik royal family had lost 3 cubs. The entire predator fleet was mobilizing. The Dravik, apex predators known across the galaxy for their military might and fierce nature, were threatening total war if their children weren't returned within 2 days. Daniel looked down at the 3 terrified faces staring up at him, royal cubs. He was looking at the royal cubs of the most dangerous species in known space. The logical move was to call security immediately, turn them over, collect whatever reward would surely be offered. But these weren't political pawns or bargaining chips. They were scared kids who'd been hurt and were hiding in his cargo bay for a reason. "Did someone hurt you?" he asked quietly. "Is that why you're hiding?" The largest cub looked at him with such understanding that Daniel knew his guess was close to right. Something had happened. Something that made these children run and hide rather than go home. Boots thundered on the deck outside. Security teams were sweeping the station. They'd reach his bay soon. The cubs heard it too and started to panic, scrambling backward. "SHH, it's okay," Daniel said quickly. He made a decision that would probably end his career or his life. Come with me, quickly. He stood and walked toward his ship's loading ramp. The cubs didn't move. Daniel turned back and knelt again. I know you're scared. I know you don't know me. But those people out there are loud and rough, and they'll terrify you more. I can keep you safe, but you have to trust me right now. The largest cub tilted its head, studying him. Then it made a decision too. It limped forward and the other two followed. Daniel led them into his ship, through the cargo hold, and into his small crew quarters. He grabbed blankets and made a nest in the corner. Stay here, stay quiet, I'll be right back. He rushed back to seal his cargo bay just as security teams reached his section. An officer, some insectoid species Daniel didn't recognize, waved a scanner at his ship. Routine check, any unusual activity. Just loading supplies, Daniel said, forcing calm into his voice. Haven't seen anything strange. The officer checked his manifest and nodded. Keep your eyes open. Missing children, very dangerous situation. Will do. When they moved on, Daniel exhaled and leaned against the bulkhead. What had he just done? He'd hidden the royal cubs of a predator species that could glass planets. But when he returned to his quarters and saw three small forms huddled under the blankets, watching him with exhausted eyes, he knew he'd do it again. The smallest cub yawned, showing rows of sharp teeth. Then it curled up against its siblings. Within minutes, all three were asleep, their breathing evening out into soft snores. Daniel sat down carefully nearby, his mind racing through the implications. Outside, the galaxy was about to tear itself apart. And here, in his tiny crew quarters, the cause of it all slept peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. He pulled up the news feeds on his tablet and started reading everything he could find about what had happened. Somewhere in this mess was the truth, and he needed to find it before those warships arrived. High Commander Vorath stood in the command center of his flagship, the Burning Talon, and watched 300 warships take formation around him. Every muscle in his body screamed to tear something apart. His cubs were missing. His children were somewhere out there, possibly hurt, possibly scared, and he couldn't reach them. All sectors report ready for combat operations, Lieutenant Bren announced. The fleet awaits your orders. Vorath's claws extended involuntarily, scoring marks in the metal railing. 48 hours. He'd given the galaxy 48 hours to return his children before he started burning stations and planets until someone gave him answers. The Dravik didn't negotiate. They didn't plead. They were the apex predators of known space, and they took what was theirs. Send the message again, Vorath growled. Every government, every station, every ship, return the cubs or face total war. Across the galaxy, panic spread like fire. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session for the third time in 6 hours. Representatives from 40 species argued and accused each other while their home fleets mobilized defensive positions. Nobody wanted war with the Dravik, but nobody wanted to look weak either. On Gateway Crossing, Captain Iris Huang reviewed security footage for the 100th time. She'd been sent by Earth's diplomatic corps to help investigate and hopefully prevent the coming war. The pressure made her hands shake as she manipulated the playback. There, she said, pointing at the screen. Back it up 30 seconds. Administrator Pell, a nervous creature with too many eyes and not enough spine, tapped the controls. The footage showed a section of the maintenance corridors near the lower docking bays. Iris watched 3 small figures running. They moved with the desperate speed of terrified children. Behind them, emergency lights flashed red. An alarm blared silently in the recording. What happened there? Iris demanded. Pell's skin shifted to an anxious purple. Chemical leak. Maintenance team was doing routine work on the atmospheric recycling system. A seal ruptured. Nothing dangerous, but the alarms and the gas startled the cubs. They were in a restricted area and ran. So this wasn't a kidnapping. No, the cubs got lost in the lower levels during the evacuation. We've been searching ever since, but those maintenance tunnels connect to everything. Thousands of places to hide. Iris felt a small amount of relief. This was an accident, not an act of war, but try telling that to Vorath. The High Commander wasn't known for his patience or understanding. Meanwhile, aboard the Wandering Star, Daniel discovered that caring for alien children presented unique challenges. The cubs had woken hungry and thirsty. He'd raided his food stores, offering everything from protein bars to dried fruit. They'd sniffed each item carefully before eating, showing surprising manners for creatures with such sharp teeth. The largest cub, who seemed to be the leader, kept positioning itself between Daniel and the younger two. Protective. Instinct, Daniel recognized it immediately. This one felt responsible for the others. "You're the big sister, aren't you?" Daniel said softly. The cub tilted its head at his tone. "Or brother, I don't actually know." He pulled up his tablet and searched for information about Dravic biology and culture. Most of what he found painted them as ruthless warriors who valued strength above all else. But these cubs didn't act like hardened soldiers. They acted like any scared kids would. The middle cub limped over and tugged on Daniel's sleeve. It pointed at its injured leg and whimpered. Daniel nodded and carefully retrieved his medical kit. The cub tensed when he approached but didn't run. "This might sting a little," Daniel warned, knowing the words meant nothing but hoping his tone would help. He cleaned the wound gently. The cub hissed but held still. When he finished bandaging it, the cub surprised him by pressing its forehead against his hand. "You're welcome," Daniel murmured. The smallest cub had been watching from the corner. Now it approached slowly, dragging a torn piece of its fancy clothing. It held the fabric out to Daniel and made a questioning sound. Daniel studied the material. It was clearly expensive, probably part of whatever formal wear the royal cubs had been wearing. The small cub kept pointing at it and then at Daniel. After a moment, Daniel understood. The cub wanted to know if its clothes could be fixed. Such a simple, childlike concern despite everything that had happened. "I can try," Daniel said. He took the fabric and pulled out his repair kit. His sewing skills were basic, meant for patching pressure suits, but he did his best. The cub watched with intense focus as he worked. When he handed back the repaired cloth, the smallest cub's eyes widened. It clutched the fabric and made a happy chirping sound. Then, before Daniel could react, it scrambled into his lap and curled up. The gesture shocked him. These were predator children, royalty from a warrior culture, and one had just chosen to cuddle with a strange alien. The other two cubs watched this development with interest. After a moment, they moved closer too. Daniel sat very still as three apex predator cubs used him as furniture. They were warm and surprisingly soft where the fur grew. One of them started purring, a deep rumbling that vibrated through his chest. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message. News. Updates flooded in. The Dravic fleet had arrived in the sector. 30 more hours until Vorath's deadline expired. Multiple governments were denying involvement. Trade routes were shutting down. Ships were being detained and searched. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, and the solution slept in Daniel's lap. He knew he should contact someone, should let authorities know the cubs were safe. But every time he tried to compose a message, he remembered how terrified they'd been when they heard the security teams. Something had scared these children badly enough that they'd rather hide than go home. The largest cub stirred and looked up at Daniel. It made a soft, questioning sound. "I don't know what to do either," Daniel admitted, "but I promise I'll keep you safe while I figure it out." The cub seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. It settled back down, trusting him completely. Outside, warships moved into attack positions. Inside, Daniel Reed held 3 sleeping cubs and tried to think of a way to prevent a war. He was just a cargo hauler, nobody important, nobody with power or influence. But he had something nobody else in the galaxy had right now. He had the truth, and he had 3 children who needed help more than they needed to be political symbols. The news feeds showed Vorath's latest transmission. The High Commander's rage was palpable even through the translation. He promised fire and destruction if his cubs weren't returned. Every species scrambled to prove their innocence. Daniel looked down at the peaceful faces of the sleeping cubs and made his decision. He would help them, protect them, and find a way to return them safely. But he'd do it his way, not the galaxy's way. First, though, they all needed rest. Daniel adjusted his position carefully, letting the cubs sleep undisturbed. Tomorrow he would start working on a plan. Tonight he would simply be what these children needed most, someone safe. 20 hours had passed since the cubs arrived on Daniel's ship. The Dravik fleet now numbered over 400 vessels, each one capable of destroying a small moon. They'd begun systematic scans of every station, outpost, and ship in the sector. Daniel watched the news with growing dread as the deadline crept closer. The cubs had started to relax around him. They still startled at loud noises and refused to go near the airlock, but they'd begun exploring his small ship. The youngest one, whom Daniel had started calling Little One in his mind, followed him everywhere. The middle cub, Limper, had started trying to mimic human words. The eldest, Guardian, watched over the other two with fierce protectiveness. "Donnie," Limper said, pointing at him. The attempt at his name made Daniel smile despite the situation. "Close enough," he said. "Daniel Daniel." "Daniel," Limper repeated carefully. The other cubs perked up at this achievement. Daniel had spent hours studying whatever information he could find about the Dravik language and culture. He'd learned a few basic words and sounds. When he tried saying "safe" in their tongue, all three cubs reacted strongly. Guardian moved closer and touched his hand, then repeated the word back to him. "Yes, safe," Daniel confirmed. "You're safe here." Through patient observation and the cubs' growing trust, Daniel had pieced together more of what happened. They'd been on a diplomatic visit to Gateway Crossing with their parents. The maintenance incident had occurred near where they were playing. The alarms, the flashing lights, the chemical smell, all of it had triggered panic. They'd run into the service tunnels and gotten lost in the maze of corridors. But there was more to it. Whenever Daniel mentioned going back or finding their parents, the cubs became agitated. Guardian would position itself defensively. Limper would start trembling. Little One would hide. Something else had scared them, something beyond the initial accident. Daniel suspected it had to do with how they'd been trained. Royal Dravik cubs were raised to be warriors from birth. Showing fear was considered shameful. Being weak meant failure. These children had been taught that being scared made them unworthy. So when the accident happened and they panicked, they probably believed they'd disgraced themselves. They'd hidden not just from danger, but from the shame of showing fear. The realization made Daniel's heart ache. They were just kids. They should be allowed to be scared. His communicator buzzed. Another news update. The Galactic Council was falling apart. 3 species had accused each other of conspiracy. 2 minor governments had mobilized their own fleets in defensive positions. Everyone was preparing for war. Captain Iris Huang appeared on multiple channels, trying to calm the situation. She'd found the security footage showing what really happened. The evidence proved this was an accident, not a kidnapping. But Voreth didn't care about evidence. He wanted his children back, and every hour they remained missing made him more dangerous. Daniel made a decision. He opened a secure channel and sent an encrypted message to the Earth diplomatic office on Gateway Crossing. He kept it brief. "I have information about the missing cubs. Need to speak with Captain Huang privately. No security teams, no alerts, just her." He spent the next 2 hours worrying he'd made a terrible mistake. The cubs sensed his tension and gathered around him, offering their own version of comfort. Little One brought him a blanket. Limper tried to share its food. Guardian sat close enough that their shoulders touched. "You 3 are something special," Daniel said quietly. His communicator chirped with an incoming secure message. Captain Huang had responded. "Confirmed, private channel established, speak freely." Daniel took a deep breath. "The cubs are safe. They're with me on my ship. They're not kidnapped. They ran away and got lost after the chemical leak. They've been hiding in my cargo bay." Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, "You've had the royal cubs this entire time. Do you have any idea what's happening out here?" Yes, that's why I'm contacting you, but I need you to understand something first. These children are traumatized. They're scared. If you send armed security teams, you'll terrify them worse. They're predator royalty. They're probably more dangerous than my security teams. They're babies, Daniel corrected firmly. Hurt, scared babies who have been taught that showing fear makes them failures. They need careful handling, not a military extraction. Another pause. Prove it. Send me proof they're safe. Daniel positioned his communicator to capture the scene. All three cubs had fallen asleep around him again, using his legs and arms as pillows. Little one clutched his hand even in sleep. Limper's injured leg was properly bandaged and healing. Guardian's shoulder wound had been cleaned and treated. He sent the image, waited, heard Huang's sharp intake of breath. "By all the stars," she whispered. "The most feared predator species in the galaxy, and their royal cubs are cuddling a human cargo hauler." "They're just kids who needed someone to be kind to them," Daniel said. "But here's the problem. I can't just hand them over to authorities. They panic at the thought of leaving. They trust me now. Taking that away could damage them." "What are you suggesting?" "I want High Commander Voreth to come here, to my ship. Alone. No weapons, no guards, no fleet backup right outside my airlock. Just a father coming to get his children." The silence that followed lasted so long Daniel thought the connection had dropped. Finally, Huang spoke. "You're asking the most powerful military commander in known space to board a civilian vessel alone, unarmed, and trust that you'll return his children. You understand that's insane." "Maybe, but it's the only way this ends without those cubs being terrified or the galaxy going to war. Will you ask him?" "He'll never agree." "He will if he really wants his children back safely. A father who truly cares will do anything for his kids, even trust a stranger." Huang was quiet again. "I'll present your offer, but Daniel, if this goes wrong, there won't be enough of you left to identify." "I know, but it won't go wrong, because I'm not a threat to those cubs, and Voreth needs to see that." After ending the call, Daniel sat with the sleeping cubs and wondered if he'd just signed his own death warrant. The logical part of his brain screamed that this was suicide. Voreth would tear him apart for keeping the cubs from him. But the part that had spent years rehabilitating injured animals, the part that understood the language of fear and trust, knew this was right. These cubs needed to see their father being calm, being safe, being gentle. They needed to know it was okay to have been scared. Guardian stirred and looked up at him with those amber eyes. The cub made a questioning sound. "Your dad's coming," Daniel said softly. "And I'm going to make sure you know you're not in trouble for being afraid. You did nothing wrong." The cub didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. It pressed closer and went back to sleep. Outside, the Dravik fleet tightened its formation. Inside, Daniel held three cubs and prayed that a father's love would overcome a warrior's pride. The next few hours would determine whether the galaxy burned or whether one small act of trust could change everything. His hands shook slightly. He was terrified, but that was okay. Being scared didn't make you weak. It made you honest. And maybe, just maybe, that honesty was exactly what this situation needed. Captain Iris Huang stood before High Commander Voreth and tried not to show fear. The Dravik leader towered over her, nearly 8 feet of scaled muscle and barely contained rage. His claws had carved gouges in the conference table. His tail lashed behind him like a whip, but she had a job to do. "A human cargo hauler wants you to come to his ship," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Alone, unarmed, he says he has your cubs." Voreth's growl made the walls vibrate. "This is the kidnapper. He dares make demands." "He's not a kidnapper. Your cubs ran away during the chemical leak and hid in his cargo bay. He's been caring for them, but they're traumatized and won't leave him. He believes you coming alone is the only way to safely reunite you with your children." "I will bring my entire security force and take my cubs back." Iris pulled up her tablet and showed him the image Daniel had sent. Voreth froze. His rage melted into something else as he stared at the screen. His three cubs sleeping peacefully against a human male. Talais, his eldest daughter, had her head on the human's shoulder. Neera, his middle child, held the human's hand. Kavan, his youngest son, was curled in the human's lap. They looked safe, they looked content, they looked like children instead of warriors in training. He's kept them alive, Vorath said quietly. Healthy, they trust him. Yes, but he says if you come with armed soldiers, the cubs will panic. They're afraid, Commander. They think they've failed you by showing fear. Vorath's expression shifted to something that might have been pain. They are taught to be strong. They're children, Ira said gently. They got scared during an emergency. That's normal. But they've been conditioned to believe fear is shameful. This human, Daniel Reed, has given them safety without judgment. He's asking you to show them the same thing. By coming alone, unarmed. By coming as a father, not a commander. The silence stretched. Lieutenant Bren stepped forward. Sir, this is clearly a trap. Let me lead a team to extract the cubs. No, Vorath said. He stared at the image of his children. I will go alone. Bren's shock was visible. Commander, that's suicide. A human could never overpower you, but what if there are others? What if this is a political move? Then I die and you burn the station, Vorath said simply. But I don't believe that's what this is. Look at my cubs, they're sleeping. When was the last time Talais slept without nightmares? When did Neera stop flinching at loud noises? Kavan hasn't smiled in months, but in this image, there's peace on his face. He turned to Iris. Send the human a message. I accept his terms. I will come alone. 2 hours later, Daniel watched the security feed as a shuttle approached his docking port. His heart hammered against his ribs. The cubs sensed his tension and gathered around him, making worried sounds. It's okay, he told them. Your father is here, just your father. Guardian made a sound that might have been a question. Daniel had learned enough of their language to attempt an answer. Father, coming, safe, no soldiers, just family. The cubs looked at each other. Limper moved closer to Daniel. Little one hid partially behind his leg. Guardian positioned itself between them and the airlock, protective instincts engaged. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk. The airlock equalized. Daniel took a deep breath and opened his side of the door. High Commander Vorath stepped through and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He was massive, far larger than Daniel had expected. His scales caught the light like armor. His eyes, the same amber as the cubs, swept the room and locked onto Daniel with predatory intensity. For a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel forced himself to stand still, to not show the terror coursing through him. Vorath's gaze moved past him to the 3 small figures huddled together. The High Commander's expression transformed. The rage, the predatory focus, all of it melted away. He sank to his knees, making himself smaller, less threatening. Talais, Neera, Kavan, he said in his own language, his voice breaking. The cubs stared at their father. Guardian Talais took a hesitant step forward, then another. Suddenly all 3 were running, throwing themselves at Vorath. He caught them, pulling them close, and made a sound that Daniel recognized as crying, even from an alien predator. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. This was their moment. But little one, Kavan, turned and reached for Daniel too. The small cub looked between his father and the human, clearly torn. Vorath noticed. He looked at Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. You kept them safe. They were scared, Daniel said simply. They needed help. Why did you hide them? Why not return them immediately? Because they were terrified of being found. I needed to understand why before I sent them back into a situation that might hurt them more. Vorath's eyes narrowed. You judge my parenting. I judge a system that teaches children to be ashamed of being afraid, Daniel said, meeting the High Commander's gaze. They're kids. They got scared during an emergency. That's normal. That's healthy. But they thought showing fear meant they'd failed you, so they hid. The words hung in the air. Vorath could tear Daniel apart with one hand. The human had just criticized the entire Dravik way of raising children, but Daniel stood his ground. Talais made a sound and pulled on her father's arm. She said something in her language, gesturing between Vorath and Daniel. The High Commander's expression shifted again. My daughter says you bandaged her wounds and told her she was brave for holding still. That fear and bravery can exist together. They can, Daniel confirmed. Being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're smart enough to recognize danger. Vorath looked down at his three cubs. Nira was favoring her injured leg less, the bandaging professional. Kavan's formal clothes had been carefully repaired. Talai's shoulder wound was clean and healing properly. They looked at Daniel with complete trust. How did you know what to do? Vorath asked. They are apex predators, Royal Dravik. You should have been terrified. I was terrified, Daniel admitted. But they were more terrified than me, and they were hurt. Nothing else mattered. They needed food, water, medical care, and someone to make them feel safe. That's universal. Doesn't matter what species you are. Kids are kids. Vorath was quiet for a long time. His cubs pressed against him, but Kavan kept looking back at Daniel. Finally, the High Commander spoke. I came here expecting to find my children held hostage. I expected demands, political maneuvering, threats. Instead, I find a human cargo hauler who risked everything to care for scared children who weren't even his species. They needed help, Daniel said again. It was the only explanation he had. Yes, they did. Vorath stood, lifting Kavan with one arm. And you gave it to them without hesitation. You showed them gentleness when they expected judgment. You treated them as children when everyone else treats them as weapons in training. He looked directly at Daniel. I have spent decades commanding fleets. I have conquered enemies and defended my people. But you have done something I could not. You gave my children peace. The cubs didn't want to leave. Kavan clung to Daniel's leg. Nira kept looking between her father and the human. Even Talai's, the protective eldest, seemed reluctant to go. They loved their father, that much was obvious from how they'd rushed to him. But they'd also formed a bond with Daniel in those 2 days of safety. They're afraid to leave you, Vorath observed. His voice held no anger, only curiosity and something that might have been sadness. Why? Daniel knelt down to the cubs' level. Because here they were allowed to just be kids. No expectations, no training, no judgment. They could be scared and it was okay. They could cry and it was okay. They could play and laugh and make mistakes. He looked up at the High Commander. I'm not saying your way is wrong. I'm not qualified to judge Dravik culture. But these three needed a break from being perfect little warriors. They needed to remember how to be children first. Vorath was silent for a long moment. His cubs watched him carefully, and Daniel could see the conflict in their eyes. They wanted to please their father, but they also wanted to stay where they felt safe. Come with us, Vorath said suddenly. Daniel blinked. What? Come to my flagship, as their guardian, temporarily. Vorath's expression was intense. They trust you completely. If I simply take them now, the transition will be traumatic, but if you accompany us, help them adjust, show them that it's safe to return home, then perhaps we avoid more damage. You want me to come aboard a Dravik warship, the flagship of your entire fleet. I want my children to be comfortable. You've achieved something in 2 days that our entire royal household could not achieve in years. You've made them feel safe enough to show vulnerability. I would be a fool to waste that. Daniel looked at the three cubs. Kavan had stopped crying and was watching the conversation with his too intelligent amber eyes. Nira had moved to stand between Daniel and her father, not choosing sides but trying to bridge the gap. Talai sat quietly, her protective instincts at war with her need for both the human and her father. How long? Daniel asked. 2 weeks, perhaps 3, long enough for them to adjust, long enough for me to learn what you've learned. Vorath's voice softened. Long enough for me to understand how to be what they need. The admission shocked Daniel. A high commander of the Dravik fleet admitting he didn't know how to care for his own children's emotional needs. That took incredible courage and humility. Okay, Daniel said, I'll help, but I have conditions. Vorath's eyebrow ridge raised. You dare make conditions to a high commander? I dare make conditions as someone who cares about 3 kids who have been through trauma. First condition, no military training during this time. They need rest, not drills. Second, they're allowed to show emotion without consequences. Fear, sadness, joy, whatever they feel is valid. Third, I get time alone with them each day so they have a safe space if they need it. The silence stretched. Daniel half expected Vorath to refuse to take his cubs and leave. Instead, the High Commander nodded slowly. Agreed, all 3 conditions. I will inform my command staff that the cubs are on leave from all training protocols. They will have quarters near yours, and you will teach me what you know about caring for them. Captain Huang's voice crackled over the communicator. Commander, the fleet is asking for status. The deadline is in 6 hours. The galaxy needs to know the cubs are safe. Vorath activated his own communicator. Lieutenant Bren, stand down all combat operations. The cubs are safe and unharmed. We will be returning to the Burning Talon within the hour. The human who protected them will be our honored guest. Anyone who harms or threatens him answers to me personally. The shock in Bren's voice was clear even through the transmission. Sir, a human is coming aboard the flagship. Yes, as guardian to my children and teacher to me, prepare appropriate quarters. And Bren spread the word through the fleet. Every ship, every crew. This human kept my cubs alive when they were lost and afraid. He asked for nothing in return. The Dravik honor those who protect our young. He is under my personal protection. Vorath ended the call and looked at Daniel. You've prevented a war. You've returned my children. And now you're going to help me become a better father. The galaxy will hear of this. I don't need recognition, Daniel said. I just want them to be okay. That is exactly why you deserve it. The next hour passed in a blur. Daniel packed a small bag while the cubs helped, bringing him their favorite blanket and insisting it. Come to. Captain Huang arrived to coordinate the transfer and stared in disbelief at the scene of Vorath sitting on the floor of Daniel's ship, watching his cubs show the human their attempts at drawing. This is unprecedented, she whispered to Daniel. Do you understand what's happening? The most feared military commander in the galaxy is taking parenting advice from a human cargo hauler. He's a father who wants to do better for his kids, Daniel replied. That's universal, too. The transfer to the Burning Talon was surreal. The warship was massive, gleaming, and filled with warriors who stared as Daniel walked through the corridors with 3 royal cubs holding his hands. Vorath led them to a suite of quarters that was larger than Daniel's entire ship. The cub's room connects to yours, Vorath explained. I am across the hall. If you need anything at all, inform the guards. They're here for your protection and convenience, not to watch you. That first night aboard the flagship, Daniel sat with the cubs as they explored their new space. It was clearly designed for them, with toys and climbing structures and soft sleeping areas. But they kept returning to Daniel, seeking reassurance. This is your home, he told them gently. Your father is right there, you're safe, and I'm not leaving yet, I promise. Talai said something in her language. Daniel's translator badge caught enough to understand. Teach father like teach us. Yes, I'm going to teach your father how to make you feel as safe with him as you do with me. Would you like that? All 3 cubs nodded enthusiastically. Kaven tugged on Daniel's sleeve and pointed toward Vorath's quarters. You want me to go talk to your dad now? Another nod. Daniel found Vorath standing at the viewport, looking out at his fleet. The High Commander didn't turn when Daniel entered. I have led millions of soldiers, Vorath said quietly. I have negotiated treaties and ended wars, but I don't know how to make my children laugh. I don't know how to comfort them when they have nightmares. I have raised them to be strong, and in doing so, I've taught them to hide from me. It's not too late, Daniel said. They love you. I saw how they ran to you. They want to be close to you. They just need to know it's safe to be vulnerable around you. Teach me, Vorath said, turning to face him. Teach me how to be what they need. 3 weeks passed. The galaxy watched in amazement as the Dravik fleet remained peaceful, parked in formation around Gateway Crossing. News spread of the human who'd saved the royal cubs and now lived aboard the flagship as their guardian. Diplomatic channels buzzed with speculation about what this meant for human-Dravic relations. But inside the burning Talon, something quieter and more profound was happening. Daniel sat in the observation room, watching Voreth play with his children. The High Commander had shed his formal armor and sat on the floor, letting Kavan climb on his back while Nira showed him a drawing she'd made. Taileyes practiced her hunting pounce, and instead of critiquing her form, Voreth praised her creativity and laughed when she tackled him. It hadn't been easy. The first few days, Voreth had struggled with every instinct to correct, to train, to turn play into lessons. But slowly, with Daniel's gentle guidance, he'd learned to just be present, to listen, to comfort without fixing, to let his children be imperfect and love them anyway. "Watch this," Daniel had said during the second week. He deliberately knocked over a stack of blocks the cubs were building. Kavan's face had crumpled, ready to cry. Instead of telling the cub to be strong, Voreth had pulled his son close and said, "It's okay to be sad. We can build it again together." That moment had changed everything. Kavan had cried, really cried, and his father had held him through it. No shame, no judgment, just comfort. Now watching them play, Daniel felt a deep satisfaction. The cubs laughed freely. They showed their father when they were tired or scared or happy. They'd stopped performing and started just being. Lieutenant Bren entered the observation room and stood beside Daniel. The officer had been suspicious at first, but he'd watched the transformation too. "I served with the High Commander for 20 years, Bren said quietly. "I've never seen him like this, happy, at peace." "He loves his kids," Daniel said. "He just needed permission to show it differently than he was taught." "You've changed the Dravic," Bren continued. "Already, other families are questioning the old ways. If the High Commander can choose gentleness with his children, perhaps strength and tenderness aren't opposites after all." Daniel smiled. "They never were. Your people are some of the strongest in the galaxy. Adding kindness to that strength doesn't diminish. It completes it." That evening, Voreth called Daniel to his private quarters. The cubs were sleeping, worn out from a day of actual play instead of training exercises. "Tomorrow you return to your ship," Voreth said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, they're ready, you're ready. They don't need me anymore." "Don't need, perhaps, but want. They've asked if you can stay permanently." Daniel's heart clenched. He'd grown to love the three cubs deeply, but this wasn't his place. "They need to rebuild their relationship with you without me as a buffer. I'll visit. I'll stay in touch. But this is your family, not mine." Voreth nodded slowly. "I understand, and I am grateful. You gave me back my children in a way I didn't know I'd lost them." He paused, then continued. "The Galactic Council has been watching this situation. They've seen how a simple act of kindness prevented a war. They've seen Dravic children laughing with a human. They want to establish formal relations between our species." "I'm just a cargo hauler," Daniel protested. "You're the bridge between our peoples. Earth has asked that you serve as an informal ambassador. The Dravic have requested the same. You would have no formal duties, but your continued friendship with my family would strengthen the bond between our species." Daniel thought about his small ship, his cargo routes, his quiet life. Then he thought about three cubs who'd taught him that love transcends species and a father who'd had the courage to change. "I accept, but I keep my ship and my independence. I'll visit regularly, but I'm not giving up who I am." "I would expect nothing less." Voreth extended his hand, claws retracted in the human gesture of agreement. "Thank you, Daniel Reed, for my children, for showing me that being a warrior and being a father don't have to conflict, for teaching me that vulnerability is its own kind of strength." The next morning, Daniel prepared to leave. The cubs clung to him, but without the desperate fear of before. They knew he was coming back. They knew they were safe with their father. They knew it was okay to miss someone and be sad about goodbyes. "I'll call you every week," Daniel promised. "And I'll visit next month. Your father said you're going to start a new kind of school, one where you learn warrior skills and also learn to paint and play music." "You come back," Calvin asked in careful human words. I promise. Taileyes hugged him tightly. Thank you for teaching us that being scared is okay. Thank you for teaching me that courage comes in all forms, Daniel replied. Vorath walked him to the docking bay. The entire command crew stood at attention, a formal honor guard for the human who'd changed everything. As Daniel reached his ship, Vorath spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Let it be known across the Dravik fleet and throughout our empire, this human showed us that strength without compassion is incomplete. He protected our young without hesitation, asked for nothing in return, and taught us that gentleness is not weakness but wisdom. The Dravik honor him. Any who harm him or his people answer to me. The crew struck their chests in salute. Daniel felt his eyes sting with tears. 3 months later, Daniel received a long-range transmission as he hauled cargo to the outer colonies. It was a video message from the Cubs. They were in what looked like a recreational area, not a training facility. Calvin was showing off a painting he'd made. Nero was practicing a musical instrument that looked like a cross between a flute and a harp. Taileyes was demonstrating a new combat move, but she was smiling, clearly enjoying the challenge rather than fearing failure. Vorath appeared in the background, watching his children with obvious pride and love. He noticed the recording and came forward. Daniel, the Cubs wanted you to see their progress. We've implemented new education protocols across the entire Dravik homeworld. Children are now taught that emotions are natural and healthy, that asking for help is wisdom, not weakness. That play is as important as training. He paused, his expression softening. You changed an entire culture in 3 weeks. The Dravik will not forget. The message ended with all 3 Cubs crowding the camera, shouting, "We miss you. Come visit soon," in enthusiastic, grammatically questionable human speech. Daniel smiled and set course for Dravik space. He had a delivery to make first, but then he'd visit his favorite 3 kids in the galaxy. The ones who'd taught him that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be kind to someone who's scared. The cargo hauler who'd prevented a war and changed a civilization continued on his route, his small ship leaving a trail of light among the stars. And somewhere in Dravik space, 3 Cubs slept peacefully in their father's arms, knowing they were loved for exactly who they were. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. The most powerful force wasn't weapons or fleets or military might. It was the simple courage to care for those who needed help, regardless of who they were or where they came from. It was the strength to choose gentleness. It was the wisdom to know that love, in all its forms, was universal. And it had all started with one human who'd heard scared children crying in his cargo bay and decided to help them.